Hey, so today I'm gonna be e-powering this beautiful GPU. It's GTX460 SOC from Gigabyte. Oops. And this GPU I got it from a friend because it was not working. It was the reason was because the PLL didn't start nor the vCore VRM. So basically the GPU had only memory rail, 5 volts and 1.8. Well, I didn't even check it. In order to get this thing running, it was very simple actually, because the VRMs themselves were electrically working and there was not a problem, like no burn MOSFETs or anything. At first I thought the PLL controller was dead, so I have replaced it, but it was to no use because it was not. And in order to get it working, all I have done was basically override the enable pin. I'm gonna show you a notation for that, which normally is being controlled by a simple MOSFET in SOT23 package. I'm gonna zoom it for you, and you can see that this MOSFET is actually disconnected on this leg. And what this is for is this MOSFET was basically pulling down enable pin of this controller, which would disable it. When you pull the enable pin low, which means to ground, it turns off. The same goes for any other controller on any other PCB, even this one, which is for vCore, and even for memory, which is this one. The weird part was that memory VRM didn't ever shut off, and as I later found out, there is not a single MOSFET connected to the enable pin, so it cannot be even shut off by the card itself. So only way it would shut off is by having a dead MOSFET or some sort of overcurrent or overvoltage protection. In order for me to get this PLL running, I first had to lift this MOSFET, or actually it's transistor, sorry. And that wasn't actually enough, so when I checked with multimeter, noticed the pin was still low, so I had to check further for another transistor that was potentially pulling it down, and it was this one. I'm gonna zoom it for you even further, hopefully, yeah, good. So this one was second one for memory shut off. As you see, it's lifted. I'm gonna remove these MOSFETs after the video because, well, I don't need them there anymore. And also vCore VRM was being shut off. So I have also checked for the controller datasheet which pin is enable. And as you could guess, it was of course pulled low, so the VRM couldn't start because, well, it was told not to. In order to enable VRM, or well, make the card not disable it, basically. Focus, thank you. I had to lift first this MOSFET. Of course, it didn't start after because this card is special and it needs two individual MOSFETs to turn it off, or has two options to turn it off at least. The second MOSFET was connected also to the vCore enable pin, also lifted. Yeah. And as I later found out, I didn't even have to lift this MOSFET because here was a 0 ohm resistor which I accidentally removed when I was desoldering this one. So basically I could have just as well removed this resistor and that would have fixed it, and I didn't have to lift it. But yeah, since I did, I'm gonna remove these MOSFETs, well, sorry, transistors, from the board. And yeah, this on any other GPU would enable you no cold bug or cold boot bug. Normally graphics cards, when they reach below -50°C or 60 Celsius, they basically turn off their VRMs as thermal protection because they get tripped as if they were overheated, which results in shutting off all the VRMs, so the card basically doesn't give an image. In order to e-power this thing, I'm gonna have to remove all of these chokes. So it's six-phase VRM, so here we have 6 pairs of chokes and MOSFETs. I'm also not gonna only remove the chokes themselves, but also the MOSFETs, because I will need them and they will be in the way for the further modification. And to be more precise, I'm mostly gonna need to remove these low side no, not these, because these are for men, but these are low side MOSFETs, which are connected to ground on 3 legs out of 4. And I'm gonna use this ground for e-powering because it's the strongest ground you can pretty much get on this thing. This 460 SOC has literally no ground on the surface that is really usable. And to prove it, I have previously e-powered one of them and it was no good. This is actually what we're gonna do. And yeah, I have used all the holes for the screws, PCIe, also on the back, capacitors, and trust me, it sucked. It didn't clog whatsoever because the ground connection was simply not meant or capable of delivering, well, reversing all the current. Let's start removing all the garbage we don't need. I'm gonna actually save it because this card currently works as it is with the stock VRMs. But given this is ADP 4100 from Onsemi, this controller is very specific in that you cannot volt mod it in the usual way by modifying feedback, because it will trip over 1.3 or 1.27 volts, and so it's kind of useless. And in order to volt mod this card, assuming you don't have the software for it, you will have to do VID mod, which is fairly complex. I'm gonna actually show you a couple of pictures of how VID mod looks like. Basically, you need to override every VID, well, 6 or at least 3 of VIDs for this from this resistors. Yeah, I guess that's gonna require another video. So a little bit of progress. As you can see, I'm scratching off the solder mask currently. Still not nearly done, and if you are wondering how, regular blade for X-Acto knife and sandpaper. Of course you could do this with Dremel or Dremel-like grinder, but the problem is you have to be extremely careful, otherwise you go way too deep and through the power plane, which is no good, and I have done that before, so need to be very careful about that. Other than that, if you are good with it, do it with Dremel and save yourself a time, because yeah, the thing is hurt from it. One very sore hand later, it's cleaned up from solder mask, and what we're gonna do next is here we have removed the pairs of low side MOSFETs, and we are left currently with open loop plane, which was originally called phase. Basically, phase is part between the MOSFETs and the choke, which is containing basically the MOSFETs and the input of the choke. and from the input of the choke it goes to the B core. And since these 6 planes from each face are currently floating or not connected to anything, we're gonna utilize them as a simple mechanical connection for our ground. And here, these pads in between them are our ground pads for the MOSFETs. And how you can tell if the ground pads are really strong or not? Do you see these little dots all over the surface? Those are called vias, and in this case they are power vias or current vias, because they are transferring huge amounts of current from the external trace or external plane to the internal power plane or internal ground plane in this case. So it is very strong ground with very strong binding, and since these pads are rather small, it will be annoying to connect to them only. So what we're gonna do is short them to the face, so our face is gonna become ground, and then we can use all of this as one singular ground. So that is the simple theory behind using MOSFET grounds for e-powering. And now what we're gonna do is pre-tin all of these planes so we can solder to them easier, and then we are gonna short all of these with what I'm using is solder wick. However, you can use copper plate or anything you like. Now that both GPUs have prepared ground and power and V-core planes, I'm gonna cut the copper, and to make my life a little bit easier, I'm gonna use paper as a stencil to cut it out first, and after that I'm just gonna translate it to the copper sheet itself. This way I'm not gonna hopefully waste too much copper, though it might still happen. I have cut and bent the copper, and I have prepared both ground plates for both GPUs. Yeah, it's nothing special really. So now I'm gonna pre-tin them, and they will be ready to be soldered onto the GPU and e-power. So, as you can see, I have added this vCore cable to connect vCore with the ePower just to test post this GPU, and what a surprise, she doesn't post. And after checking, found out the PLL doesn't start, so that might be our culprit. So I'm gonna override it exactly like I did with the other card by lifting two transistors. This one is the first and the other one is on the back side. And hopefully the GPU will start after. If it doesn't, it might still be complaining about not having 6 pins connected because I didn't connect them to power supply before. But they shouldn't be needed in any way, shape or form because memory VRM is powered by PCI Express slot just like PLL. So, the card now posed somewhat. It was not just missing PLL, but it was also 3 resistors right over here. Focus! Thank you. Those 3 resistors, I knocked them off apparently when I was cleaning up the power planes, and yeah, so the GPU couldn't post. But hey! Now that both copper plates are prepared and ready to be soldered on, what I'm gonna do is cover this surface with Kapton tape, or at least try to do so, in order for it not to oxidize too much, so it will remain nice and shiny. vCore plane is soldered, GPU is also posting, which is awesome. However, I have noticed one slight issue while I was soldering, and that was the resistance between the vCore and ground dropped from 4 ohms to 0.4 ohms. If you ask me how I'm gonna solve this, it's rather simple. I'm gonna do the right thing and pretend I didn't see it. So, it is the other day and I'm testing it again with actually proper mounting hardware, so the GPU mount is not crooked, which it was yesterday. And also, it is a little bit overclocked. Not too much. Just 1140 megahertz on the core. Let's see if she passes. This is the result. Move it. Thank you. Okay, 6196. I have no clue how good or bad it is, but we'll see. Here you go, the clocks. Well, also some tests. And yeah, if you're wondering, this is the temperature of liquid that's cooling it.